It's not that unusual. Earlier this year, the volcano in St. Vincent, you might remember, erupted, and that had been asleep for about 40 years, since 1979. So, and volcanoes like this one in La Palma often have sort of sequences of eruptions or have fissure eruptions every few decades or something like that. So it's not particularly unusual for something like this to happen.
Yeah. Locals say they should have had better warning because there'd been thousands of these micro fissures ahead of this eruption. What are these micro fissures and how do they present, and why should that have been a really good warning to authorities?
So there was a lot of earthquake activity, which we look for before volcanic eruptions. And the local monitoring agency did pick up a sequence of earthquake swarms, which happen when the magma is moving, it's breaking the rock, it's causing fractures in the rock, and those fractures generate seismic waves. And there were thousands of small earthquakes before this eruption, and the alert level was raised by the Volcano Observatory and the civil authorities, and an evacuation did take place before the eruption started, so they did see it coming. One of the challenges is that you can get a lot of earthquake activity and no eruption.
Right.
So all it shows you is the magma's moving around. It doesn't show you it's going to get to the surface, and it became clearer that was a very likely possibility in the few days before the eruption, and they did make some preparations for that.
Yeah. Now they're talking about these sort of openings being torn in the hillside. What happens when what does that mean, and what might that be a warning of?
So the kind of eruption that this is a fissure eruption. So it's a long crack of magma that opens up in the hillside, and you often get multiple vents from that, multiple centres where the lava's coming up along a line. And they've got a couple of fissures involved in feeding this eruption. And that's just a process of extension, essentially, that a sheet of magma is sort of rising up like this and reaching the surface, and eventually those will consolidate into a sort of one or two main kinds of vents. It's a very similar process to what we've seen in the recent and ongoing eruption in Iceland, fissure eruption that kind of... It's just a tectonic process. It's quite common in extensional zones, but also on ocean islands like this, where you've got a sort of what we call a rift zone. You've got the central volcano, but there's also a rift zone going down laterally from it, and this is an eruption that's happened on the rift zone.
Yeah. So what does that mean? Does it mean that this eruption could last a lot longer? How do you measure when it's going to be safe to sort of try and come back to the area?
It's very, very hard to say how long it'll last. These kinds of eruptions can just last a few days or a week, or they could last for months or even longer. Commonly they last for several months in this kind of a setting, but there's no way to really know that without having a very good estimate of how much magma there is down there, and that's very, very hard to tell, especially on an island, because we don't have sensors under the sea to look into the crust at depth. And one of the challenges really is knowing when it's safe to go back as well. Really, you have to wait for the eruption itself to stop, but then it will take a long time for these lava flows to cool down. So reoccupying the land where the lava is could take many years. Going back towards the vent should be possible a few months after the eruption stops, once the gas levels have gone down, and that's one of the kind of key challenges in managing this kind of an eruption, is that it produces or can produce quite a lot of toxic gas.
That is interesting.
And the scientists on the ground.
Yeah, and so how long might what sort of long-term damage does that kind of cause?
The volcanic gas itself mostly goes away in the atmosphere quite quickly. It can cause some damage to vegetation and things in the very short term. The lava obviously destroys properties and infrastructure, and there's no way of really getting around that. So, but the gas is also very toxic to breathe in. So it's just the immediate vicinity of the eruption while it's going on that's a really big problem from a sort of a hazard point of view, from the gas and from the lava.
So it could be some time before locals, and they're quite small communities, life can return to normal. Really tricky. We'll watch with interest. Amy, thanks very much.
Thank you.